on Senate Bill 31, Senate Bill 46, and at 11:15, Senate Bill 54. Before we get going, I'm going to read the announcement that is required by law. Thank you, Pam, for catching up. I should have told you we were going, so you could have clicked the live stream, but we are on. So good morning, everyone. Members using devices, please remember to mute and turn off sound to avoid feedback, and consider turning off your video if you're using the keyboard for taking notes. For good sound quality, we ask that members please speak clearly with some volume. Soft voices can be heard, but can be hard to understand. The microphones in the room pick up sound very well, and be careful about side conversations. The room computer will be muted if we recess between hearings this morning. In regards to the sign-up sheet, but committee members have been provided the sign-up sheet. It was closed at 8 a.m. this morning. If you sign up on this bill since 8 a.m., we will not have your names in front of us this morning. You will have an opportunity to speak if you wish to do so after all the previously registered persons who want to speak have been called on. You will be allowed to sign on and register your opinion up till 11:59 tonight. As to this meeting, as chair of the House Election Law Committee, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and in accordance with House Rule 67 and the governor's emergency order number 12 pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. This is a public hearing on bills that have been referred to the committee from the Senate and scheduled in the House calendar for today. An executive session may be held on any bill referred to the committee. It is not this chair's intent to do so. Please note that there is no physical location for members of the public to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting. However, in accordance with the emergency order, I'm confirming that all members of this committee and select legislative staff have the ability to communicate contemporaneously during this meeting through the Zoom electronic meeting platform, and the public has access to contemporaneously listen and, if necessary, participate in the meeting by the Zoom platform or by telephone. All necessary access information has been made available to the House calendar and through the electronic calendar in the General Court website. The notice for this meeting complies with House Rules and RSA 91A. Anyone who has a problem accessing the meeting should call 271-3600 or email hcs@ledge.state.nh.us. In the event the public is unable to access the meeting will be adjourned and rescheduled. Please note that all votes are taken during the meeting will be by roll call vote. And the only roll call I anticipate will be attendance, and I ask that the clerk do that after we do the Pledge of Allegiance. I have a pledge in my office, a flag in my office. If you do also, I ask that you join me, and then we will do the roll call. I pledge to the flag of the United States
of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice
for all. Thank you. All right. Representative Wells, can you take the roll? I need you to unmute. There you go.
There we go. All right. Representative Bergeron.
I am present. I am calling in from home, and there is no one in the room with me at the present time.
Thank you. Representative Barry.
I'm present at my home in Manchester. I'll probably be joined by my cats at some point, but I am alone.
Representative Cody.
I'm here. I'm in Nashua. I'm alone. No cats even.
Representative Freitas. You're here. Okay. Madam Chair.
I am present. I am alone. I'm in Bedford.
Representative Groen. He's here. He just needs to unmute.
Can you hear us?
Yes. Okay. Representative Hamblett?
Yes, hi, I'm here. I'm in my home and there's another family member in the house.
Thank you. Representative Hamer?
Hi, I'm here and my home in Manchester.
Thank you. Representative Hayward?
Present.
All by yourself on there. Representative Lane?
I'm at home in Concord. There's one other family member present in the house, but no one in the office.
Thank you. Representative McDonald?
I'm home and I'm alone.
Representative Mooney?
Present in Merrimack, at home, alone.
Representative Muirhead?
Present and alone.
Thank you. Representative Prudhomme O'Brien? No. Representative Quayle?
Present. I'm at home in Ringe, in my home office by myself.
Thank you. Representative Sandler?
I'm home in my home office. My husband is elsewhere in the house.
Thank you. Representative Sweeney?
I'm at work in my office. There's 3 other people in the building, but I'm in a room by myself.
Representative Terosian?
I'm at home in my house in Atkinson.
Okay. Representative Ward?
Here at home in Portsmouth, 2 family members wandering around the house.
And I'm here. Okay.
All right, thank you. It is 10:09. The first bill scheduled for hearing at 10 o'clock is relative to voter checklists and modifying the absentee ballot affidavit. This is SB 31. The prime sponsor of this bill is Senator Gray. Co-sponsors are Senator Ward and Representative Lang. I have as being signed up to present this bill Senator Gray, and if Senator Gray could join us and unmute, I think we will be all set. Good morning, Senator.
Good morning, Madam Chairman. I am James Gray. I represent District 6, which is Alton, Barnstead, Gilmanton, Farmington, New Durham, and Rochester. The bill in front of you, Senate Bill 31, does really 2 things. Right now, when someone either registers and says that they last voted, especially out of state, but even in state, that information is put into ElectionNet. And this shifts the responsibility of notifying the out-of-state people from the town clerk and the supervisor of the checklist to the Secretary of State. They can gather these things up with the contacts that they have through the Secretary of State's network and provide that information, and also get that information from the other states that we're doing this with, and that's the surrounding states. And it should mean a much more efficient and easier process on the towns to complete that and to keep their checklist updated with the information that's provided. The other portion of this has to do with the absentee affidavit. Both of these items were talked about in the interviews that were done with the Secretary of State after the last election. And they noted that there was people, if they had a problem with the affidavit, sometimes they didn't sign either one. And when they were asked about it, they were confused about which one to sign. There's really no reason in state law that we need to have 2 separate affidavits. This combines the reason at the top of the form, lets you sign one place, and that combined with some other legislation that you'll get about opening the outer envelope sooner should ensure that even if someone does make a mistake, that there will be ample time for them to correct it. But like I say, with this piece of legislation, the first section that I talked about should make it more accurate, the information going back and forth between us, Vermont, Maine, etc. And also in here, reducing the confusion of the voter of which affidavit they should be signing. So I'd be happy to take any questions you have.
Thank you, Senator Gray. Does anybody on the committee have any questions for Senator Gray? I see one hand. Hold on. Representative Bergeron.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman, and welcome, Senator Gray. My question deals with the first section, 654.13, action by supervisors, lines 8 through 10. It states that if a person enters the place last registered to vote on the voter registration form, it shall be entered into the statewide voter registration database. There's already a statute that, I guess maybe it doesn't demand that they do it, but there's already a statute that says the form and the database shall include the current information on the voter registration forms pertaining to last place registered to vote. Why is there a need to have this in two different statutes?
There probably isn't. This wording was provided to me by the Secretary of State's office, and I don't believe that it conflicts in any way. And having it in both parts of the statute, having it here, I think promotes readability of the statute without having to go to another statute to read what it says there.
Okay,
if your
thank you.
committee decides that you want to do something different, certainly we'll review it when it gets back to the Senate.
Okay, thank you, Senator. No further questions.
Does anybody else on the committee have any questions for Senator Gray? All right, I'm not seeing any. Thank you, Senator Gray, for coming and joining us this morning. Is there anyone else in attendance that would like to speak on this bill? We have 12 attendees. I'm looking for somebody to see if they want to speak and raise their hand. Up. Mr. Meyer joins us this morning. Mr. Meyer, if you unmute, I think you will be able to join us.
Good morning, Chairwoman and members of the committee. My name is Lucas Meyer. I live in Manchester, New Hampshire. Signed in as neutral to this bill, and my focus of attention is on actually Section 3 of the bill, which instructs the Secretary of State to establish essentially their own version of a cross-check program or an interstate program to monitor movements in and out of the state, change of addresses, which I think a good idea. But what I would direct the committee's attention to is the Electronic Registration Information Center, also known as ERIC, which was founded in 2012 as part of the Pew Charitable Trust, but is now since been taken over by the member states, of which there are many. A majority of states are now members of ERIC, and these are Republican-controlled states, Democratic-controlled states. And ERIC was created to fix a major challenge facing election officials, and that's how to ensure easy access to voter registration while maintaining accurate voter lists. And this is difficult for election officials to do, particularly nowadays as Americans move around so much. And extensive research confirms that voters' mobility can make it hard for voter records to keep up to date. For example, in the past 10 years, I've lived in Newmarket, I've lived in Ward 2 Manchester, Ward 3 Manchester. So, me alone, I appear on many different voter lists. So since voter lists and records can be out of date, election officials can send information to voters who do not exist, voters who cannot receive information from where they've moved, or how to vote. When voters don't have that correct information, they end up having problems at the polls, leading to longer lines, frustration, all things that can be avoided. So ERIC is a sophisticated data center governed again by the state to choose to participate, which helps keep these voter lists up to date while also increasing access to voter registration for eligible citizens. Again, 31 states plus the District of Columbia are members. And notably, both Florida and Massachusetts are member states of ERIC. And why I draw attention to those two states in particular is that during our participation in Crosscheck, the system run out of Kansas, which is now defunct and no longer operating, a majority of those duplicates that were flagged for the Secretary of State came from Florida and Massachusetts, what makes a lot of sense if you lived in New Hampshire for any period of time. So both of those states are members of this existing program, as well as a majority of Northeastern states. And so what does ERIC do, and what are the benefits for New Hampshire? One, it's going to identify millions of voters who have moved within the state and out of state. You know, they've identified 2.5 million voters who moved out of state and therefore no longer eligible to vote in that state. Over 240,000 voter records for individuals who have passed away since they last voted. Over 320,000 duplicate registration records. In all total, since 2018, ERIC is responsible for correcting over 10 million voter records that were no longer accurate. So this really does a good job of making sure we are catching double registrations, we're tracking who's moving in-state, out-of-state, and all of this will be done for New Hampshire as a member of ERIC, for a very nominal cost of, the first year of ERIC membership, which includes an entry fee due, would be around $50,000 to $60,000. Moving forward,
Mr. Myers, this is Representative Griffin. Are you testifying about the state joining ERIC, or are you testifying about the bill? Because I don't see a fiscal note on this bill, and I didn't take this bill to mean we were joining ERIC, and Senator Gray is still online. Perhaps he can respond after you finish. Thank you.
The reason I bring up ERIC is I believe I would encourage the committee to consider an amendment for Section 3, since it's instructing the Secretary of State to build a program that already exists in the form of ERIC. So it seems to me to be a colossal waste of taxpayer dollars for the Secretary of State to build an independent system from what already exists that we could become a member of and join a majority of states that would accomplish the goals forth in that amendment, in Section 3 of the bill.
Are there any further questions for Mr. Meyer from committee members?
I guess, Madam Chairman, I have a question.
Representative Barry.
Mr. Myers, did you say that Massachusetts was a member of ERIC?
They are in the process of becoming.
Okay, so they're not currently a member.
But they have passed legislation to join, and also technically Hampshire does not need legislation to enter into ERIC. Secretary of State could do that on his own. Be good for everyone to be on board with this.
Senator Gray.
Texas became a member. Florida's a member.
Mr. Meyer, you just told us Massachusetts was a member, and apparently they're not. So perhaps you can follow up in writing as to who exactly is a member of ERIC. Thank you. Senator Gray, did you want to respond?
Certainly. Over the past 6-7 years, we have had the discussion about Crosscheck and ERIC several times. It was brought up in the last sessions. This year, ERIC is out there. ERIC requires you to do several things beyond this cross-checking of information. It prescribes how you are going to solicit new voters. Parts of the things that are in ERIC are also considered in the U.S. House Bill H.R. 1, and we might be having a different conversation had that bill been passed by both the House and the Senate and signed by the President, but it is not. This is not a new system. The system out there often referred to as ElectionNet, is existing. It already has the capability to produce the files that would be transmitted to the other states. So this is a no-cost option. That's why you don't have a fiscal note. And if the good representative wants to introduce a bill that mandates that the state go into ERIC, I'm sure that next November, when we open up the ability for him to file that legislation, he may do so.
Further questions or comments from committee members? Let me go to, is there anybody else attending this meeting from the public who would like to comment on this legislation? Ms. Spencer, if you unmute, you are with us. I believe I have, Pam, if you're on it, I believe I promoted Ms. Spencer. She had her
Yes.
hand.
She's with us.
Oh,
there we go.
I'm so sorry. I didn't unmute myself. I apologize for that.
Okay. Good morning.
Good morning. Hello, members of the committee, and thank you, Madam Chair, for taking my testimony this morning. I did want to speak to Section 3 of the bill as well, because I think it is so essential, this component that we have accurate voting rolls. It is the foundation of ensuring safe and secure elections. It's what inspires confidence that those who are voting are in fact current eligible voters, reduces the risk of identity fraud, saves time for the state and local workers who administer our elections, and it reduces costs. So I think we all agree here that, and I know that you as members of the election law committee know this better than most folks. The National Conference of State Legislators has said that the goal of maintaining an accurate voter list is to ensure that eligible voters are able to cast a ballot, to keep track of who has voted, to prevent anyone from voting twice, and by reducing inaccuracies, speed up the voter check-in process at polling places. Voter registration lists, they also say, are the foundation of everything else in election administration. So just underscoring that really important point. And Section 3 of this bill recognizes the importance of accurate voting lists. The question is, how do we get there? And as Mr. Meyer testified, there are tools out there, and ERIC is one such tool that I think it would be helpful for this committee to take a look at in the context of this bill. Over the course of the last election cycle, I sat in on many supervisors of the checklists meetings, and ElectionNet, while being a helpful tool, is by far from being the tool that is needed by these election workers. In fact, one day I went to supervisors of the checklist meeting that had to be postponed because ElectionNet was down. And when everybody signs in all at once, when these meetings are held on the same day leading up to elections, the system gets overloaded. The beauty of a system like ERIC is that it allows states to be towns, to be getting the data on a regular rolling basis so that they can update as they go along. Also, many times I was in on discussions where supervisors were saying they were not able to access particular information about voters and were have to resort to arcane methods of mix and match and guessing about whether they were talking about the same voter. In fact, I've witnessed where they were unable to, they actually, because of the difficulty in matching this information, made some mistakes about recommending who should be removed from the polls. one thing I would like to say is that a tool like ERIC is really, it is just that. It's a tool. It does not require the state to do anything. In other words, it provides data that the state can use. I do agree with Senator Gray that in the instance of ERIC, it does have some, the members do agree to take certain steps in reaching out to unregistered voters, which I think is actually a net benefit of a program like ERIC. But in terms of the data itself, that is standalone reporting that comes back to the states that then can be used as a tool. So I've seen the frustration that supervisors of the checklist have. This is a problem that we need to address. There is a tool out there and available, and to be suggesting that as the Secretary of State, I know has done in several meetings and hearings that I've been a part of, that we should build our own tool. Really is going to present a cost to the state that is pretty hefty, if not insurmountable, and requires a degree of investment of time and resources that seems unwise when we have such a good tool as ERIC available. So I too would recommend and hope that you would be looking at adopting or having an amendment brought before this committee so that you could really take a good look. I think we saw that elections, you know, we all, it's a bipartisan issue. We all agree that we need to ensure the safe and secure elections and the confidence that people have in our elections. So thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Ms. Spencer? Representative Muirhead. Representative Muirhead, did you have a question? If you can unmute. Yep, I'm not seeing his hand anymore.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Spencer. Is there anybody else in attendance?
Thank you.
On this bill SB 31 who'd like to speak? All right, I'm not seeing anybody, so thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to close the public hearing on SB 31. It is 10:30, so I am going to open the public hearing on SB 46. SB 46 is relative to the use of electronic poll books by cities and towns. With us today, we have a number of speakers signed up, and I guess I'd like to know who is here to introduce it. Senator,
I see the senator's hand is up.
And Senator, you are with us. If you could introduce SB 46. Welcome to the Election Law Committee. Is she with us, Pam?
Yes, yes.
Senator, welcome. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Thank you, Chairwoman. I'm well. How are you?
Good. All right. SB 46.
Thanks very much. So good morning, everyone. For the record, I'm Senator Rebecca Perkins Quokka. I represent Senate District 21, which is Portsmouth and the surrounding towns on the Seacoast. I'm prime sponsor of SB 46, an act relative to the use of electronic poll books by cities and towns. A pilot program on the use of electronic poll books began around 2015. The towns that have been involved have had a very good experience and are anxious to make the program permanent. Specifically, I've spoken to the town clerk of Milford, who has participated in the pilot program. She's very supportive of this bill. I'm not aware of any issues that have arisen with the electronic poll book system in the pilot. The language involved in SB 46 would create an entirely opt-in system for our municipalities, and no municipality would be forced to adopt electronic poll books if they did not wish to. An electronic poll book is a small administrative change that will be used on election day. Instead of having paper checklists, towns that choose to use poll books will have the information electronically on a computer or iPad. Such devices can or cannot be hooked up to Wi-Fi, although I'll address that further below. Poll books will speed up lines at polling places, which will decrease waiting times for voters, and it makes elections officials' jobs easier, not only with people flowing through the polling place quicker, but poll books tabulate all of the information that election officials have to collect at the end of the election, saving municipalities time and money. The process on election day would remain largely the same. The voters would be asked to provide the same documentation they are now. If they do not have documentation, they will be able to sign an affidavit. The hope is that electronic poll books simply provide a quicker check-in and shutdown for the clerks. They also can enable additional ways to back up the checkup information, as some towns have used the electronic system alongside a paper system in order to create duplicates. After extensive conversation with the Secretary of State's office and the Senate process, under the current language of the bill, the poll books will need to be approved by the Secretary of State, and they are not comfortable at this time approving the systems for voter registration, which is another capability of the poll books. That would require connecting the machines to Wi-Fi or the internet, which is a process the SOS needs more time to vet. So at this time, the ask is simply to allow the use of electronic poll books once approved by the Secretary of State for voter check-in. That said, the hope is that we have electronic poll books available as an option for voter check-in for the municipal elections for the fall, so that if the clerks wish, they are able to use the system in a live election prior to the federal and state elections next year. Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman, for the opportunity to present, and I'm happy to answer any questions, although there are some here who may be better equipped to answer those questions.
Thank you, Senator. Are there any members of the question? Representative Terosian.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator, for taking my question. I think I heard you say that if this is adopted, the idea is to at some point have the ability and in essence have polling places be connected to the internet. Did I hear that correctly? And could you elaborate on the reason for that?
Sure. And just to restate, that's not the proposal this year, though this legislation would enable the Secretary of State to approve poll books in conversation with them. And I don't know if Deputy Scanlon's available today, but you know, that process would take some time. So that's not what we're proposing to be available this year. But yes, eventually, you know, like any computer or iPad, this software could be hooked up to the internet and it could be used for voter registration. So in other words, the system would be updated live for voters that choose to take advantage of same-day registration on Election Day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Lane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator, why is it the Secretary of State is approving the poll books rather than the ballot commission? Because I think it's the ballot commission that approves the voting system, the voting machines, if I'm not mistaken.
That is a very good question, Representative. I unfortunately don't think I'm the right person to answer that, but I do hope we can defer that question potentially to one of the other speakers, and I'll make sure that it's answered for you.
Thank you.
Representative Prudhomme O'Brien.
Thank you. And thank you, Senator Perkins Coker. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Excellent. So my question is about section 4 at the end, and it talks about the Secretary of State preparing a regularly updated set of instructions and best use practices for the use of electronic poll books. Is that where the online the poll books connected to the internet would be addressed?
It could be, yep. And I think there are some other references in here. I'm just looking, for example, in section 2, in the third line, it references approval by the Secretary of State. So Yes, both of those references, and actually the first sentence of section 3, I'll refer to how the Secretary of State would be able to approve these devices for successive uses over time.
Representative Muirhead.
Sorry, I did not mean to raise my hand. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sorry for being.
That was my
I'm moving
easiest
around too much
question.
this morning.
Yeah. Anybody else on the committee who has a question for the senator?
Madam Chairman.
Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
You need to get together with Representative Muirhead. He raises his hand when he doesn't want to talk and you can't raise your hand. So you two
Well,
need
actually
to
raised
chat.
my hand, but then it went down without me lowering it. I don't know what happened. Must have
All right.
Again, thank you, Madam Chairman, and good morning, Senator.
Good morning.
My hometown of Londonderry actually has been using the this system in the last couple of elections. Would they have had to get permission from the Secretary of State to do that?
Thank you, Representative. That's a good question. Under the pilot program, I believe that each town that wanted to use a new vendor needed to have that vendor approved. And I believe that would have been a process through the Secretary of State, but I would actually like to make sure that that's true and ask that one of the later speakers confirm that for you. But again, I'll make sure that you get the answer to that question.
Thank you. And follow up, Madam Chairman?
Go ahead, Representative.
Senator, so is the purpose of your bill to basically achieve a uniformity and a careful regulation of this system? Should it go statewide or be more widely used?
Yes, I think that's one of the purposes. I mean, this is a tool that hopefully will save our municipalities time and money. You know, I know from my years on city council in Portsmouth that election days are long days. They're 15 or 16-hour days for our clerks. And so, yes, I think uniformity is a good thing. I also think options are a good thing. And so not every city or town may be ready to adopt this yet. And until they are, you know, we may not get to that uniformity, but the hope is that now that we've had a successful pilot program, that we're just simply giving our towns and cities more tools to do their job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Further questions from panelists? Thank you, Senator. Not signed up to speak per se, but with their hand raised, and I think would be helpful for the committee to hear from now, would be Deputy Scanlon. Deputy Scanlon, you have joined us. Welcome this morning on SB 46.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm David Scanlon, Deputy Secretary of State, here to support this bill. And I have enjoyed working with Senator Quokka on moving the issue of e-poll books forward. Just a little bit of history. A few years ago, the legislature did approve a trial program for electronic poll books, which involved first of all, a town or towns or cities interested in testing them to make that decision and then work with an evaluation vendor, which is designed to look at the electronic poll books in use, take a look at their security, look for vulnerabilities and the overall usability in the polling place. There have been, I believe, 4 towns in New Hampshire. There have been 4 cities and towns in New Hampshire that have attempted to use them, but Londonderry and Milford have been using them now for a couple of years in a kind of a quasi-test format. The report from the evaluation vendor at this point is incomplete on both of those poll books. They have found some vulnerabilities. I know that that the vendors are working on addressing those. But I think what we have learned, and this will all come out in a report that's due in November to the legislature, is that simply looking at an electronic poll book in its entirety and trying to approve it is a lot to deal with. The,
Kathy.
the towns that have been
I'm
using.
good. How are you?
The towns that have been using them have been using them in parallel with the current check-in system, but they have realized some real benefits in terms of the efficiency of the line at the polling place, and then gathering and reporting all of the data that they need at the end of the night after the polls close. So this bill would allow that process to move forward in a more formal way and save the issues related to voter registration on the electoral book for down the road, because those issues are a lot more complicated when we're dealing with, how do we integrate that information directly with the voter database, ElectionNet. Is it going to be a hardwired connection? Is it going to be Wi-Fi? And if it is, I mean, those are issues where there are real security concerns, and there have been failures in those systems in other states. We are going to be meeting with the clerks and the moderators from the towns of Milford and Londonderry next Monday to start the process of just reviewing where they're at, how we can move this tool forward, anticipating the passage of this legislation so that we can make the system more broadly available to other cities and towns in the state. And then in an incremental way, approve the additional components of this system, moving in the direction of using it for voter registration as well. And we believe that process is prudent. It makes sense for the state of New Hampshire, and it allows the towns to be able to use the benefits of these systems by reducing their lines at the polling place and being able to report results much faster at the end of the night. When I say results in terms of voter check-in information, which does take them some time to do after the polls close. So with that, Representative Lane did ask a question about why doesn't the Ballot Law Commission approve these devices. The statute gives the responsibility to the Ballot Law Commission of approving electronic ballot counting devices, but a poll book is not an electronic counting device. It's something different. I mean, certainly if the legislature wants to include them in the approval process, I don't think that we would oppose that. Ballot Law Commission might because it's more work for them, but that's the reason why the language in the bill did not include the Ballot Law Commission from the start. So with that, Madam Chair, I would be happy to answer any other questions. Madam Chair, I believe you're muted.
Thank you. I always defer to Deputy Scanlon as the master of this Zoom meeting, having run the meetings last summer with hundreds of people attending. Representative Terosian, did you?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Deputy Scanlon, for taking my question. So I just want a couple points of clarification, if I may. So I believe I heard you say the towns of Londonderry and Milton have been using this kind of as a test pilot program. Are there any other municipalities using it?
I believe that Rochester at one point tried them out, and I believe that Manchester at one point may have tried them out. There are two different vendors that provide the machines. The one that is used in Milford is known as Electech, and the one that is used in Londonderry is known as No Ink, and their product is called the Poll Pad.
Follow-up question, Madam Chair?
Representative, go ahead.
Thank you. So would you like to see more testing then prior to this becoming a potentially permanent addition? And is this legislation needed to have other towns do testing of this and get more data?
I think we have reached the point now where we can move the trial forward into a program in terms of using the devices for check-in. I think that they have the trials that these two towns have done in that regard show that they do work and that they're a useful tool, and they can make the process in the towns more efficient. We need to continue the work where we might consider using the devices for voter registration at the polling place in the future. I think that there's still a lot that has to be vetted in that regard. And so the bill is necessary because the trial program ends at the end of this year. And this is the next logical step to move the process forward. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we are in agreement with that.
Thank you very much.
Representative Prudhomme O'Brien.
And thank you, Deputy Scanlon, for taking my question. My question is a bit of a two-parter. I would like to know why the city ward in Manchester and the city of Rochester had previously participated in the trial, but then did not continue with that. Is that correct? Do you know why? And then my other question is about vulnerabilities. You said some vulnerabilities were found, but what were those specifically? Talk about that a bit.
Thank you, Representative. The first question, I don't know the reason why Manchester and Rochester only use the devices once. I don't know if Senator Gray is able to comment on Rochester, but I don't know the answer to that. The second question was vulnerabilities. I don't specifically know what they are. I know that the evaluation vendor was not able to just give the devices a clean bill of health. They are required to give us a report, which we have not yet received. And when they do, that information will be made public and will be part of the report that we issue in November. However, in terms of the voter check-in and the way that process has worked, with the safeguards that are currently in place, I think that's a pretty safe system to use. And the concern there obviously is that if the device is crashed or were unable to continue in use after the polls had opened, to be able to fall back onto the paper system that we have in place so that we can continue the election without lines forming and kind of losing track of where we are. And I think that the trials that have been undertaken in both Milford and Londonderry have shown that we can do that. And so our comfort level has gone way up in that regard.
Senator Gray, did you want to comment?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Rochester has 6 wards. We did the test in one of the wards. It was all equipment that was lent to us by one of the vendors. And as far as I know, because of the other tests that are ongoing right now, that opportunity has not been provided to us for the other wards or for an ongoing basis, even in Ward 4.
Representative Prudhomme O'Brien.
Thank you. Deputy Scanlon, and perhaps Senator Gray, you could answer this. There was some talk about paper backups in case there's a problem, then the election can continue. Have there been any problems such as that in New Hampshire? I know you only have the 2 communities, 4, that have used it. Have there been any problems where they then had to use the paper backups in New Hampshire? How did that go?
Madam Chair and Representative Prudhomme O'Brien, I am not aware of the trial towns having any issues with the e-poll books that they have used. Both of the towns are using a paper backup system so that they're keeping track of the voters that are going through independently of the information that's being collected at the check-in by the electronic poll book. So if at any point during the election there had been a failure, they would be up to date within 10 or 15 minutes and could put in place a paper checklist to continue the process moving forward with a very limited delay.
Representative McDonald. Representative McDonald, you need to unmute.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Just a comment, and I would defer to our town clerk, Sherry Farrell, but by all indications that I'm aware of, the system has worked very well for Londonderry so far in every election when we've used it. So it has proven beneficial from what I can see.
Other committee members. Deputy Scanlon, this is Barbara Griffin. I have a question. I am aware that there are other voting precincts, not in New Hampshire, that have used electronic poll books, where the electronic poll books have malfunctioned, resulting in court proceedings to extend the time the polls are open for the amount of time the poll books were down. And I note that you say that we're doing a paper checklist parallel and there's a lag time, but if I go to the first page of the bill, line 26, section 1, it provides that or a paper checklist shall be marked in parallel. So is a parallel checklist required or not? And if it's not, if the electronic poll books go down, how do you then switch to a paper checklist that has not been getting completed in parallel? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I believe the language in the bill gives the flexibility to require a paper checklist in parallel with the electronic poll book, which is pretty much the practice right now that is occurring in Londonderry and Milford. There may be at some point, enough practice with these devices, enough experience, and enough confidence that we can move away from that process in the future. But that would only happen if we know that we can conduct an election without the potential for the failure, because where it has happened, it has been catastrophic. And obviously that's something that we don't want to have happen in New Hampshire. And, and we would make sure that we have proper procedures in place to deal with that if it were to occur. So hopefully that answers your question, but I don't believe that we would approve a system where we would simply rely on the electronic poll book until we have a lot more information, relative to their ability to not malfunction.
Well, Deputy, if you could take another look at the bill, because I think this bill proposes exactly that the paper checklist is an alternative that's available and not required. Thank you. Okay.
Madam Chair.
Representative Prudhomme O'Brien has her hand up.
Thank you, Deputy Scanlon. I'm not sure if this is a question exactly, but I'll try to phrase it as one. If the possibility for catastrophic failure is it's there, how is this an improvement over paper poll books? I understand wanting to make the whole process go faster, but I think, how is it an improvement? I'm just worried about catastrophic failure.
Thank you, Representative Prudhomme O'Brien. So the way that the system has been working now is that the polling places have been following the statutory process in the law, which involves a paper checklist, which has to be marked off as a voter goes through. The towns that are using the devices have decided to use them in addition to the statutory process that is currently taking place. And even by doing so, the benefit that they are realizing is that the voter showing up at the polling place does not have to get in a line, first of all, by the alphabet of the first letter in their last name. They can go into any line that is the shortest and check in. And then there's a process, there's a slip that comes off that can be taken to the supervisors that are marking the checklist. The name is marked off the checklist with a bit of a lag time, but the paper checklist is being maintained at that point. So that's a time savings right there, and helps keep the lines in the polling place moving. The real benefit, however, is at the end of the night when the polls close and the poll workers, the supervisors of the checklist, are charged with collecting the information off the paper checklist in terms of how many voters checked in the case of a primary, it might be which primary ballot they took, and things like that. As that information is entered into the electronic poll book as the voters check in, that information is immediately available at the end of the night when the polls close, simply by pressing a couple of keys on the, on the laptop that keeps that information. And that's a tremendous time savings for the towns in that regard. And so those two items alone have been the real benefit that the towns have seen regarding these devices. And I'm not sure if the clerks or the moderators from Milford or Londonderry are going to testify, but they could probably give you a better explanation of that savings, with their testimony.
Thank you, Senator Gray.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I just wanted to comment on a couple of those. There's also savings after Election Day, is that the town clerks go back into ElectionNet and mark you down as voted, not voted. If it's a primary, they also take and mark up which ballot that you've took, whether you return to your undeclared status. And that is another savings in addition to the savings at Election Day. There was another point I was going to comment on, but it escapes my mind right now. If I remember, I'll be back with you if you have any additional.
I will be watching.
Oh, the paper checklist.
Okay.
That the receipt that you get, okay, if the voters are allowed to go to any of the machines, okay, then the paper checklist isn't there for you to mark it up. So there are schemes out there that says that you would take that piece of paper, use that to get your ballot, and then that piece of paper would be given to a clerk, and the clerk would mark up the checklist from that slip of paper that was printed out for when you voted. There's also talk about putting a QR code on it and having another computer there that would scan that and then automatically make up the checklist. But that would mean that you would have to go back and actually print the checklist in that 10-minute time frame that is talked about. And communities that have more than 20,000 voters in the community, that becomes very difficult to do. So just those two comments. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity.
Okay, we'll let you jump back in at any time. All right. Is there anybody else on the committee? Representative Groen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Deputy Secretary Scanlon, if you mentioned that there are vulnerabilities, that there have been some significant security failures in other states that have been catastrophic, wouldn't it be better at this point to extend the trial period rather than make this a permanent feature as it appears in this legislation?
Thank you, Representative Groen, for that question. I believe that we are ready to move the ball forward on this, understanding that there's a lot of functionality to these devices. And it's clear to me that if we have to approve the device in one motion, that it's going to be a long time coming. I think the great thing about this legislation is that it allows us the process to approve the functionality in an incremental way where towns can realize the benefits of using them, where we are comfortable that the technology is going to be safe and that it's not going to impact our election process if they go down. I think all of you know, if you've been following, Secretary of State's use of technology, in other areas in the state, is that we are very, very cautious about, about going with newer technology for these reasons. Is that other states that have tried things and had failures experience real problems at the polling place, and we're pretty adverse to that. So we're not going to approve something technologically unless we are really sure that it has been properly vetted, that the experts have taken a look at it and have that confidence that the system is going to work and not cause a failed election. So we are comfortable using the device where we know that it's going to function properly. But we're also willing to look at the other functionality, again, in an incremental way so that, we're comfortable seeing those benefits moving forward once we're confident that they're fail-safe.
Thank you.
Further questions from committee members? I'm not seeing any, so thank you, Deputy Scanlon, for joining us. I'm going to move on to people who have signed up ahead of time to speak. If they would raise their hand, I will recognize them. Pete Basilaire, are you with us today? Is there a Joan Dargy here? Pete, Mr. Basilaire. Thank you very much. You are with us. If you want to unmute, you can speak to this bill. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman, and good morning, everyone on the committee and others. Yes, I am the town moderator in Milford. I've been the town and school district moderator now for 13 years and have participated with our town clerk, Joan Dargy, in implementing the tests that have been referred to earlier today. In Milford, we use the Electech brand of e-poll book. And that process involves having the voter checklist after the last supervisors of the checklist meeting prior to an election. That list is downloaded onto the e-poll book, and then the e-poll books are brought to the polling place. In Electech's implementation, and the way we use it in Milford, the e-poll books are all hardwired one to another. So there is no internet access on the e-poll books. And in fact, the e-poll books in our implementation are computers, and they don't have wireless features on those computers. When a voter approaches the ballot clerk and successfully checks in, the voter is handed a slip of paper, much like a receipt that you might receive at a retail outlet. And that slip of paper has the information, the public information about the voter, their name, their address, their party affiliation. And before the voter leaves that station, we ask the voter to double check to make sure that the information on the slip of paper, which is the record that we have for them in the checklist, is correct. So once the voter has reviewed the slip of paper that we give them, they go to a common location where they exchange the slip of paper for a ballot. If it's a primary, obviously it'll be the party ballot. And if it's a local election, it would be the town and school district ballots. That slip of paper is retained by the clerks who are handing out the ballots. And then periodically throughout the day, those slips of paper are gathered up, put into alphabetical order, and we have a set of clerks who are marking on a paper checklist the voters who have checked in during the course of the day. So as Deputy Scanlon pointed out and is noted in the proposed legislation, we are making a copy of the names of people who have checked in successfully in near real time. Depending upon the number of people in the polling place at the moment, it's in that 10 or 15 minute window that is referred to in the proposed legislation. Now, when we think about catastrophic failure, remembering that the implementation we have in Milford is not connected to the internet, that they're hardwired, the machines are all hardwired to each other. And in the case of the March election just passed, we used 6 books. Last fall in November, we used 12. When they're all linked together, if it's a catastrophic failure, it's would be, depending upon your definition of catastrophe, it could be one machine that goes down, in which case all the others are still up and running and still can process voters. If several or all of the machines go down, that's when we would revert to the paper checklist. So anticipating the possibility of a failure, as moderator, when I set up the polling place the night before, I make provision for being able to change over to paper checklists and remove the paper ballots, put up the signposts that indicate the letters of the alphabet and so forth. And the time it would take us to relay out the polling place by removing those electronic e-poll books and implementing the paper checklist is about the time that it would take us to catch up, so that we have recorded on the paper checklist all the voters who have checked in prior to the failure of the e-poll book. So we do have a paper backup that is going to provide us, provides me as a moderator, and it provides the voters with an assurance that if there is a failure in the e-poll books, that we have the ability with negligible, if any, delay in the process, aside from changing over from electronic to paper, that we can make that happen. And we have a paper backup that will be used, generally speaking, if there's a question about the e-poll books after the fact, or in the case of a catastrophic failure. So again, I just wanted to stress that in our implementation, the Electech books are all wired each to each other. In Milford, we've been using it for well over 2 years now, starting with a local election. We've used it in the primary, we used it in the general election and the national election last fall with no issues whatsoever. As I point out, if there was an issue, the changeover time is negligible. And one last point is that if you take the e-poll books away, the voters in Milford are going to revolt. They love them. You know, it's like, well, it first come, first serve. First person in the polling place, it gets checked in, and the next one behind them. They don't have to wait in line with all the other M's or C's or whatever. So thank you for listening to my comments, and I'm happy to take any questions, Madam Chairwoman, that you may allow.
Thank you. Does anybody on the committee have any questions for Mr. Bezalier? I'm not seeing any. Thank you very much for joining us today and giving us your experience. You mentioned, and I have on the list, I'm going to ask again, is Joan Dargy here? I'm going to ask if Cordell Johnstone.
Can you hear me?
Okay, I can. You're a code, so I didn't realize it was you.
I'm sorry.
So welcome.
I clicked the wrong line when I signed in.
Okay.
So one thing, Representative Griffin, and thank you everybody for hearing my testimony again. For Representative Griffin, when you were asking about the OR paper checklist,
right,
that's in reference to, we are required to have either enough high-speed color printers on hand or the paper checklist. We opted for the paper checklist because I did some research into what the cost of having high-speed printers that could print out our 800-page, 900-page checklist in less than 50 minutes and it would have cost us $24,000. So we opted to use our volunteers and fill out a paper checklist in the back of the room. The other thing that you asked about was catastrophic failure. And when I looked into the catastrophic failure that happened with poll books in the United States, Mariposa County is the one that comes to mind. And their catastrophic failure was they never set the poll books up correctly to start in the morning. So when people arrived at 6 a.m., they had no backup, and their IT department had not put them together correctly. So I that was in preparation for the election. I felt, because I really looked into what could be catastrophic failures. On another note, it was, and I'm not sure if Manchester did do a pilot with these, but it was Bedford that did the test. So I'm not aware of Manchester actually ever doing one. It was Bedford, and again, and then the vulnerabilities. I've been working a lot with our Electech book vendor, and they found some issues with the system, but there's no vulnerabilities on at least the ones that we're using with, it was Cyber Scout that came to our site, and they did a security check while we were using the poll books. The issues that they found are all in the background and in auditing. And I guess I'd question whether that's necessary, because the auditing that they're looking at it, like today with a paper checklist, one of the benefits that came up during COVID was that I had a voter who came in and voted with COVID. I was able to go into the electronic poll book and see exactly what time they checked in and who the ballot clerks that were working at that time, which is a great feature. The Cyber Scout who was looking into the background of the system wants it even more detailed than that. But I mean, our person that came in, checked in with COVID, came in at 10:29, and we can tell exactly what poll book they checked in on. I know everybody's heard all this before. Deputy Scanlon did a great job of talking about everything, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Does anybody from the committee have any questions for Ms. Doherty? I'm not seeing any. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Also signed up to speak was Cordell Johnstone. Mr. Johnstone, you are with us. If you unmute, you will be able to testify.
Good morning. I think it's,
Good
yes.
morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Cordell Johnston, representing the New Hampshire Municipal Association. And I just want to agree with, to the extent that I understand the technology, I certainly agree with everything that others have said. The Municipal Association is very much in support of this legislation. I have talked to Pete Besselier from Milford quite a bit about it, and he raves all the time. And I know that there are other towns that are very interested in pursuing this, maybe not immediately, but in the near future. I think there are probably a lot of towns, smaller towns, that would not pursue this because there is a cost to it. The cost of the poll books is borne by the town, so it's a matter of figuring out whether it's worth the expense and the effort. But for the larger towns and the cities, it really is a time saving, and many of our members would be interested in pursuing it. That's all I have to say, unless anyone has any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Johnstone? I'm not seeing any, so thank you for joining us. That concludes the persons who have signed up ahead of time to speak on this. Michael O'Brien joins us, and he has asked to speak to this bill. Good morning, Mr. O'Brien. If you unmute, you should be all set.
Thank you, representative members of the committee. My name is Michael O'Brien. I just want to clear up a couple of things. I'm going to start with Pretty Strategies on behalf of my client, America Votes. I used to work directly for America Votes for years and worked on electronic poll books through the trial, and so have some history with these. Couple of things. One, Manchester never ran a trial, just so folks know that that never happened, and so I know there was some question about that. I think this might have been covered, but I do want to say to your question, Representative Griffin, the full sentence in the proposed legislation says that you can either do a printer, a high-speed printer, or a backup paper checklist. So the high-speed paper printer would cost the towns a lot of money, and that's why they decide not to do, or a lot of towns don't want to do that. But either way, you're going to have something that creates an effective backup right away. And then as far as some of the things that we've heard about problems with the e-poll books, most of these problems were driven by the user. So we look back in Georgia, for instance, there was one where they tried to open up the polling place and there was, there was no data on the poll book, but that was because the person who runs their election, I don't know what the name of that person would be in Georgia. Here we call them the moderator, obviously, didn't upload the list to the poll book. So when he turned it on, there was nothing there. That's user error. It's not poll book error. And because in this legislation, we are requiring paper checklists, we can be rest assured that if that were to happen, that we would have a paper list there ready to be used. Additionally, so folks know, if there was like a power outage or something that happened in the town, not only would we have the paper checklist, but much like every electronic device that we own, these things run on batteries, right? They don't, if the power goes off, they're not going to turn off and sort of lose all connection to the world. They will still be operational and use. And again, because we're not using internet with them, we don't have to worry about losing the Wi-Fi, et cetera, et cetera. But all of that also gets solved with a backup paper checklist, which this legislation mandates. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but just wanted to clear up some things that I heard during the question and answers from the secretary. Thank you so much.
Does anybody have any questions for Mr. O'Brien? I'm not seeing any hands. Mr. O'Brien, this is Representative Griffin. Back to the catastrophic failure. There seems to be a lot of reliance based on the fact that you can print the list if the town has opted for a high-speed printer when there is a catastrophic failure. Is there any guarantee that a catastrophic failure isn't going to be a shutdown of the poll books? And at that point, then printing a list is impossible? Or am I missing something?
I think printing the list would be hard. Like if you lost power, you could still print it at City Hall and have the list delivered to the polling place, or Town Hall, have the list delivered to the polling place. I also do think that every clerk that I've talked to, and it's been numerous, who wants to use poll books, acknowledge that they would show up to the polling place with a paper checklist, because they want that backup, right? Just as you all want it in the committee, no moderator, clerk who's running a polling place is going to want to run it without making sure that they're prepared for anything, right? And that's why our elections run so smoothly, because of all of their hard work. And that's part of their work, and they understand that. And so, I strongly suspect we'd see paper backups ready for any situation, because they know they want to be ready as well.
Thank you. Any further questions for Mr. O'Brien? I'm not seeing any, so thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Is there anybody else here this morning in attendance who'd like to speak to this bill? This is a public hearing on SB 46 relative to electronic poll books. I'm not seeing any, but hold on, I've got a question, it looks like. Pam, does somebody have their hand up to speak at this point?
Somebody just labeled IT department, and I don't know who that is, has a hand up.
Hi, thank you, Representative Griffin. Can you hear me, everyone?
Yes.
Thank you. Hi, I'll be very brief because so many points have already been made in support of this. My name is Sherry Farrell. I'm the town clerk here in Londonderry. And as you've heard, Joan in Milford really led the the force on this, and I jumped on board with her based on the knowledge that she had. And as Representative McDonald stated, here in Londonderry, it's been a complete success, but we have guidelines through our phenomenal Secretary of the State's office. And as Dave stated eloquently for us, they have watched and observed every move that Milford and Londonderry has made, and it's been a huge success. Everything that's stated is accurate, and we're grateful. The towns that were mentioned that had the early studies were really more just kind of exploration points, not really jumping into the reports and all of that. I'll leave you with one cute story, which goes along with what Pete from Milford had stated about that, you know, if we're not allowed to use these wonderful resources, our voters, residents will probably burst into tears here in Londonderry. An 85-year-old woman wrote me a letter after the general election and said that she almost didn't come. She'd voted every year, every time since she was 18, but getting older, she just couldn't bear to come in and look for that alphabetical M again and wait in that line when, you know, somebody else in a Y could just zip in. And when she walked in, 85, mind you, and saw the poll pads and that there were no crazy letters anymore, and you could go to the first person that was open, she was elated and just so grateful for this new technology. And it speaks to what our you know, we have to be progressive in what's coming into the future with technology, but also our seniors are very supportive here in Londonderry, and I know Milford, of this technology, and they're grateful for it. So I'll leave you with that. I thank you all for listening so intently, the great questions that you're asking, but I do ask for your support on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Representative Groen, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Farrell, do you use the same process that was described by Mr. Basileir, where a slip is printed and then presented for the ballot, and then you keep the checklist updated as you go through the day?
Absolutely. And again, you know, this is, I know we can kind of tend to jump into things and new ideas, but our Secretary of State's office through the years, that's why we are first in the nation. And that's why here in election, I have great pride in being part of the process as a town clerk because of the transparency and the checks and balances that we have. And yes, that is part of the requirement in us getting involved in the test program, that we had to have that paper checklist ready and available at all times. And they actually came down and observed in Milford and in Londonderry to make sure that we were doing it according to their guidelines. So, you know, I have to thank them for their support in that, you know, and it really takes a village to make these things happen. One person can't think of all the things that we need to take care of.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? I'm not seeing anything on as far as hands or on my screen. So thank you very much for joining us. Is there anybody else in attendance who wants to speak to SB 46? I'm not seeing any, so I'm going to close the public hearing on SB 46, and I'm going to open our next bill hearing. We're starting a little late. It was noticed for 11:15, so thank you everybody for being patient with me who's here for this bill. SB 54 is relative to the absentee ballot application form. We have a few people signed up to speak on this bill, and at this point I'd like to ask who is going to be introducing the bill. If you could raise your hand if you're not already with us. Is Senator Gaida here? Is Senator Daniels here?
I see Griffin Roberge, who's a Senate aide, and perhaps he is here for one of the senators.
Thank you. Mr. Roberge, if you unmute, you can join us.
Sorry, good morning, Representative Griffin, can you hear me?
We can.
Sorry about that, thank you. For the record, I'm Griffin Roberge, legislative aide to Senator Gaida. Simply just want to let the committee know that Senator Gaida will be here shortly to introduce Senate Bill 54. He is currently driving down the highway to get to his computer and to introduce this bill. So if the committee would call on him when he is available, that'd be greatly appreciated.
All right.
Chair, this is Senator Gray.
Senator Gray.
I'd be happy to introduce the bill for Senator Gaida. He can
Thank you.
comments at the same time. This bill started out with asking the absentee voters to provide a photocopy of a driver's license, much in the same manner as we ask people when they vote in person. We've modified that, very difficult for some of our voters to do that, so that if you look at the bill the way it is right now, on page 2, and we're looking at lines 25 through pretty much the bottom of the page. We tried to make that as easy on a voter as we could do it and still provide some information. We ask that they put in, if they have a driver's license or a non-driver ID, that they put in the number in the state, or they can use the option of providing the last 4 digits of the Social Security number. And then we've got one other thing at the bottom is contact information that the town clerks have. Town clerk, if you were married in the state of New Hampshire, knows who married you, who stood up with you. Certainly they could, if you could verify that information, because the records are there for in every town clerk. It may be the account number on your tax bill. It may be the account number on your water bill. It may be the name of the person that's running the shelter that you stayed at last night. It may be any number of things that the town clerk can verify. And they have a wealth of information that if you just let your imagination go a little bit, that can uniquely identify the person. Again, we're not trying to make it more difficult for people to register if they are the person that they say they are. Writing down those last 4 digits of the Social Security number is not hard, but if they choose not to do that because they don't want to share that information, there are other options out there that they could use. Another one that comes to mind is they registered a car. Certainly those records are available to a lot of the town clerks because they also function as the tax collector. So again, whatever the town clerk can, look up and verify, that's fine, because the people who should not be voting, if someone were to try to use your name, your identity, and try to vote, we're just trying to weed out the worst of the worst, and not make it difficult for the voter, not make it difficult for the town clerk. The driver's license number and state, or non-driver ID, and the 4 digits of the Social Security number are fields in ElectionNet right now. Certainly those could be used that way. And again, it's what we think is a common sense way of doing this. And I mentioned the U.S. House Bill H.R. 1 before, and it still talks about being able to use no more than the last 4 digits of a Social Security and identification and things. So we think that this is a common sense bill, provides us some indication. I tell people that if propriety would allow, I could go there with nothing in my hands, nothing in my pockets, and go in and sign 4 affidavits and vote. That's still the case. This doesn't take that away from them, but it allows, communications between the people. So enough said. And if the good senator, when he gets here, wants to add to that, I'd be certainly happy. But since I did write the amendment that did this, I might be able to answer your questions.
Senator Gray, just for clarification, you mentioned registration a couple of times. This bill actually has to do with applying for an absentee ballot, correct?
Correct. But in the registration form, there is an option to include the driver's license number and state and the last 4 digits of the Social Security. So it can work together with that application process at the same time and provide information that the voter may have already provided when they registered, and that being a good check to make sure that with very little trouble for the voter and make it easy for everyone, that would be appreciated. They enter that information.
Representative Terosian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Gray, for taking the question. So just a point of clarification, if a voter was to pull an absentee ballot request and didn't want to show their driver's license or any other ID, they could simply give their name and the last 4 digits of their Social Security number. If they did that, is there a way to, let's say somebody come in and said they were Frank Smith and just gave 4 digits of a Social Security number. Is that enough information to verify that person is who they say they are?
Again, because we are on the application for the absentee ballot and they are already registered in the system, then their name, address, and other information, which they also would be providing on that application form. And if they provided that information, at the time they did the request, you notice that in the lower section of the bill, it also allows the town clerk to contact the state or the local office, police chief or whatever, to verify. So if they did not provide, say, the driver's license number and state, or did provide that, and it wasn't in ElectionNet, then they could certainly go and look that up.
Thank you.
Further questions from committee members for Senator Gray? I'm not seeing any. Oh, Representative Muirhead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator. I'd like to ask about the phrase "one or more of the following" on line 25. And is one of the following sufficient, or are voters expected to fill out all 4 of the following if they can?
One is sufficient. Some may want to provide additional information. I certainly wouldn't stop them from doing that. The 2 easiest for the clerks would be the driver's license number and state and the last 4 digits of the Social Security number, which there are fields in the statewide database, often referred to as ElectionNet, for recording that information. And should they request ballots in the future, if they provided either one of those numbers, they could be verified with the information they previously provided.
May I have a follow-up, Madam Chair?
Sure, Representative.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator, I'm concerned that voters applying for an absentee ballot will be anxious that their absentee ballots count as they're filling out this. And they may wonder whether one of these is sufficient to make their absentee ballot count. If 1 or 2 of these are actually better ways of ensuring the ballot counts than others, have you thought about singling those out so that an anxious voter can be certain that their absentee ballot will indeed be counted?
Thank you, Representative. Many of these absentee ballots, the person is actually standing in front of the town clerk at the time. So if they provided their driver's license, there's a separate section in state law that talks about not having to do signature requirements, which are enjoined right now us from doing that. But there is the statewide system that you can go in and check on your absentee ballot. It's available on Secretary of State's website, and you can certainly do that. remember that we are, there's also a piece of legislation that's coming before you that expands upon the opening of the outer envelope that many of the clerks and moderators asked for that to be extended. Well, the legislation that should be coming in front of you expands that so that even several weeks before the election, the clerks will be able to establish a procedure, open those outer envelopes, inspect them, and then provide feedback to the voter if there is any additions, changes that need to be made. So, you know, if they provide more than one, that's fine. If they provide one, you know, that's fine too.
Thank you.
Representative Groen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Gray, for taking my question. From Rochester, as you are, I appreciate your serving our district. In line 27 and 28, the town clerk is authorized to verify the driver's license or non-driver's license ID number if the person gives the last 4 digits of the social security number. Does the town clerk have access to the social security number of the person to verify that those are the correct digits?
Not that I know of. There could be some records out there that a town clerk could know about that I don't know about. But remember, this information is going to be put into ElectionNet when they provide it. And then in subsequent times that they would be able to check that against the information that was provided previously.
Thank you.
Further questions from panelists for Senator Gray? I'm seeing none. Thank you, Senator Gray, for being here and for stepping in. Also signed up to speak on this bill is a Todd Fahey. Mr. Fahey, are you here? I'm not seeing any. Oh, Mr. Fahey, with permission, I'm going to recognize Senator Gaida. He joins us. Welcome, Senator Gaida. We hope you didn't drive too fast this morning, but Senator Gray has introduced your bill and we've been taking questions, and he's been taking questions as you have heard. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I appreciate your indulgence. There's nothing I can add to what Senator Gray has provided. In fact, most of the credit for this bill, I introduced original legislation. Senator Gray then worked extensively with me to provide what is necessary as opposed to what I had thought was necessary. And I'm very grateful to him and to the members of the committee.
Thank you. Any questions for Senator Gaida? All right, great. Mr. Fahey, you have joined us. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, members of the committee. I am indeed Todd Fahey. I trust you can hear me okay?
We can.
Lovely, thank you. I am Todd Fahey. I'm the State Director of AARP New Hampshire. We have some 215,000 members in the Granite State, the great majority of whom vote and are very engaged in all things political and civic. In fact, our organization has long been very focused on a nonpartisan civic engagement and participation in our political process. We and our involvement in these issues is nothing new. I have submitted written testimony, which I provided to the committee. And I would start by saying we do oppose this bill. And I understand the senator's comments and the reasons for it, but we appear in opposition to the bill because really we oppose things that create any barrier to voting. And I want to give you a perspective that I think is important in this case. The whole idea of a driver's license or social security number, we might all assume that's an easy thing to provide, even the last 4 digits, or that it's easy to figure out what the numbers are on a utility bill. I don't think that's necessarily so. And it is certainly more burdensome than what we currently do. And I believe I understand why the effort is happening now to do what we're doing. But I would also say that some 30 to 40% of Granite Staters voted absentee in the last election by virtue of the pandemic and the bipartisan legislation, which that would both chambers passed and the governor supported. We also supported that legislation. And certainly in any given year, it's about 10% of the electorate, from the best information I have from the Secretary of State's office, votes by absentee. So it is really important that there is no impediment to voting. And I think to the extent that this creates one, like somebody couldn't find their identification or their license, or they could not recall the number, or they didn't have their social security card or the last 4 digits of it. It's a barrier, it's a burden. And, I would come back to the point of these are fundamental rights. And there are 2 that I really highlight, and you all know well, and New Hampshire, we're blessed to have a great House and a great Senate, and our elections are run well here. But Article 11 is amongst the rights that we enjoy is the right to vote. And anything that makes it more difficult for a person to enjoy that franchise in New Hampshire, particularly since we really had in the past very uneventful elections. I mean, in the 2020 election, and again, this according to the Secretary of State's office, I know we have one town where we're having a recount, but generally the elections were secure and well run. The vast majority of it. And, Article 11 really talks about the fact that the fundamental right to vote is a right that is so important. And if people wish to exercise that right via absentee ballot, they ought to be able to do it in New Hampshire easily and readily and without impediment. And, there's another article we talk about with much less frequency, and it really hasn't been changed since 1754, and it's about the inculcation of social virtues. And we residents and citizens of New Hampshire, and I'm a native of the state, so I was born here and been here an awfully long time. We look to our elected officials to really safeguard the fundamental principles of the Constitution. And what is really more fundamental than the right to cast one's ballot? I do talk about Article 38, and I don't know that we talk about it a lot, but in a time when these are things and concepts that were drafted, hundreds of years ago, to really make sure that we weave tightly into the fabric of our democracy, those things that we all hold dear. So with those 2 thoughts, and the third thought is there might be some Privacy Act concerns under federal law. I'm not going to say with certainty that there are. I would just flag it for the committee's consideration. And it may be nullified by the fact that you're only requiring 4 digits of the social security number, but nonetheless, it's something worth contemplation. And so for these reasons, we would ask that this not pass out of committee, and without certainly further changes to be sure that there's no impediments to a Granite Staters' right to vote. Thank you for your time, Madam Chair.
Are there questions for Mr. Fahey? Representative Terosian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Fahey, for taking my question. Are you aware of anybody in your organization or any of your members that don't have a social security number?
Am I aware of them?
Yes.
I can't say that I do or don't know if they have one or not.
Okay. Follow-up question?
Representative.
Thank you. You mentioned the Privacy Act, and if you're aware of any way that the current proposed legislation would violate that, could you supply that specific information to the committee for us?
Sure. I think I did put some written testimony, Representative, in, and that would be the extent of the position. I didn't say it with the certainty that it was a violation. I simply flagged it for the committee's consideration as you go about considering this legislation. And then secondarily, to go back to your point, it's not necessarily about the social security number, Representative. It's whether people have the ability to recall it and to produce that information without having to maybe go to the social security office or go through additional steps to provide that information that may be readily available to you or I, but it may not be readily available to some. And that was the position we take. Thank you for the question.
Any other questions of our committee members for Mr. Fahey? Representative Prudhomme O'Brien.
Thank you. Mr. Fahey, I just got the state constitution and started reading Article 38. It goes on to say that the people have the right to require of their lawgivers to exact and to form and execute the laws necessary for the good administration of government. Wouldn't this fall under that? And I just want to make a note that I recently cared for my elderly mother-in-law for many, many years. And at my fingertips at all times was a file that says important ID and papers. I could get it at a moment's notice because I had to every time she had a doctor's appointment or needed medical care. Is this something that's too burdensome for your members?
Thank you for the question, Representative. The last few sentences I did not hear, they got muted. I did hear your comments. I could speak to them. I just want to make sure I'm responsive. Something about our members?
I was just reading from the state constitution from Article 38, which requires of lawmakers to form and execute laws necessary for the good administration of governance. And wouldn't this fall under that?
With suitable amendment, it certainly would, Representative. And I think I would hearken back to the beginning of Article 38, and it says a frequent recurrence to the fundamental principles of the Constitution, which is the first sentence. And the drafters were not ones to be reckless with language. So I do think with suitable amendment, and I recognize that you were going about the work of the people. And I think that the work of the people and the charge of Article 38 would require that kind of consideration.
Further questions from committee members for Mr. Fahey? Mr. Fahey, I actually have a couple of questions. Well, I think I'm welcoming you back to our committee. Is that right? We've heard from you on other bills, right? So welcome.
Thank you.
And
yes,
you said that you live here in New Hampshire. My recollection is you might have been out of the state for a few years. And I'm saying that because I'm looking at your testimony and talk about SB 54 requiring a reason for voting absentee ballot, for taking an absentee ballot. Are you aware that's currently in the statute and there's nothing in this bill that proposes to change that?
Thank you for the question, Representative. I'm speaking only to the requirement of an additional information to be provided so as to exercise the right to vote via absentee ballot. And no, I have not been out of the state. I've been here very much. I haven't gone very far, frankly, for quite a while.
All right, well, that's good because your letter says specifically that SB 54 requires certain things and those are currently in statute. So I just wanted to clear that up. As to your comments as to the Constitution, you did a lot of work on Article 11 and all the amendments. So thank you for that. So my question would be then, is there anything specific in your testimony that comes from the organization that you represent, AARP? There's a lot of constitutional arguments, but I'm curious to see whether AARP, based on its members, has something specific.
Well, thank you for that question, Madam Chair. And two points. I wouldn't be testifying if the testimony was not consistent with AARP policy on voting. So my testimony is entirely consistent with AARP policy on ensuring that the franchise is not denied or made more difficult to any voter in the United States, particularly those who are members and those who are over 50 plus. And so I would speak to that issue. And then secondarily, I mean, certainly, our members have, great concern about their ability to vote and to vote safely and to exercise their right. That's something that we have been involved with for years, and certainly as recently as last year when I did indeed testify before your committee.
Right. Thank you.
Did I answer your question, Madam Chair? If not, I'm happy to go further.
No, that's fine. If I have a further question, I'll just follow up with you.
Thank you.
Any other questions from panelists? All right, I'm seeing none. So thank you, Mr. Fahey. Also signed up to speak on this bill is, and I see your chair has to take her glasses off here, Paulina Sayas. And thank you very much for joining us. And if you unmute, you will be with us. Ms. Sayas?
Yeah, hello, can you hear me?
Morning. We can.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Chair, for allowing me to speak. I would like to bring a few points about this bill. First of all, the language when I read it, one or more of the following that should be provided, that was confusing even for me and created some anxiety. So I wonder if it would be better to simplify the language and just say one of the following, since this is sufficient, not requiring. Secondly, I would like to mention that recalling social security number is not as easy for some people as it would be for others. My mom is over 65, she's 66, and she always has difficulty recalling her social security number. So it may seem like it would be something straightforward, but even like looking for like account number for some utilities or other information might be cumbersome and would certainly add additional barrier to request an absentee vote. My parents are naturalized citizens, and even following like basic instructions for them is requiring some level of, reading, comprehending, but any additional information always adds additional layer of complexity, which should certainly be a deterrent. And I can imagine that is more difficult for elderly people or those with disabilities as well. And the last point is, I think this bill also requiring a signature of the person who is assisting in filling out the form, which would also be difficult because sometimes assistance can be provided over the phone, or the elderly person might be living alone and they might be showing this form or discussing it through like what we call communication video, something like that. And so that person may not be able to sign the form, which would certainly be additional barrier. So I would like to speak in opposition to this bill. And I agree with many of the points that were raised previously by Mr. from the EFG. Yeah, Mr. Fagan. Yeah. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for joining us this morning for the hearing. Does anybody on the committee have any questions for Ms. Sayas? I'm not seeing any. Thanks a lot. And thanks for signing up ahead of time. And that is the last person that I have signed up to speak on this bill. Is there anybody else in attendance who wants to speak on this bill? Representative Horrigan, welcome to the committee. Representative Horrigan. Representative Horrigan. Representative Horrigan, if you unmute.
There, now I'm unmuted. I'm Representative Timothy Horrigan. I represent Stratford County District 6, which is the towns of Durham and Madbury. Durham is in fact a college town, so I was pleased to see that they did recognize the reality that driver's licenses from other states, thanks to a interstate compact, between all the other states and actually all the Canadian provinces, one driver's license is fungible with another. So that's something that we lose track of a lot, like we're losing track of it. And this is this is not within the purview committee, but like even over like the vaccine rollout and certainly over voting. So I testified against the original version of this bill in the Senate Election Law Municipal Affairs Committee, and this isn't quite as egregious. The original version of the bill was even more misguided, but this is just a totally unnecessary bill, and this also requires people to write down information on the absentee ballot form, which they may not necessarily want to share with all the people who look at it, especially if it's on ElectionNet. And I'm sure the security in ElectionNet is good, but still there's people on there who you might not necessarily want to know your driver's license. That's usually between me and the DMV as far as concerned, or even the last 4 digits of my social security number. I'm not much younger than the young woman's grandmother, and I'm pretty sure I know the last 4 digits of my social security number, but I personally often mix them up with the last 4 digits of my credit card number if I was asked. So that's I think there's no need for us. There isn't really any procedure for what to do if the clerk gets what appears to be a bogus driver's license number or bogus social security number. And I don't, by what Senator Gray said, I don't think they really have any, I don't think they can just necessarily look up that data in the other files and verify it. So this bill is just one more attempt to overcomplicate the electoral process. If anybody was doing this on a large scale, having fictitious absentee ballot applications, that would be caught anyway, despite what people say. The Attorney General and the Secretary of the State's office do pay a lot of attention to voter fraud, which also, of course, is a felony, so it's very risky. So if somebody was doing multiple fake absentee ballot applications, I'm quite confident they would be caught. I'm quite confident that they could be published, they could be punished very severely anyway. So all this thing does is just make what's already a difficult process more difficult for average citizens who just want to do their civic duty and vote. So I would say you should find this bill inexpedient to legislate. And I don't know if any significance to the fact that you're hearing it today instead of putting it off till after April 7th through 9th, if indeed you are planning to fast track this and exec it today so it can be on the calendar next week. I hope your decision will be something other than ought to pass, like preferably inexpedient to legislate. So that's basically what I have to say about the bill. So thanks for recognizing me. Sorry, it's a little bit slow getting unmuted, and I suppose I can answer any questions if anybody wants to ask me any. But
there are some people who want to ask a question, Representative Horgan.
not be able to-
Representative Rowan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative Horgan, for taking my question. Do you see any need for assuring that the identity of a person requesting an absentee ballot remotely, that we do make some assurance that that person is who he or she says he or she is? Or do you think we should just simply take their word for it that they are that person?
I think I'll just say I think the protections are already in place are sufficient. I know my town clerk, and every town clerk takes her job very seriously. I know the supervisor are checklists, and they're trained to detect fraudulent activity. And this bill, if passed, would not help them do that, because there's probably still ways that a criminal, a sufficiently determined criminal could still try to game the system. So I think all this will do is confuse a few people who are maybe struggling with their paperwork anyway, but are still have the right to vote and still should vote. And also, it also forces you to provide certain information that's put in a form that probably a form that maybe other unauthorized people can see in a database that I don't necessarily 100% trust, but I know it's necessary. So that you're putting information, leaving lying around that I know I and most sensible people try not to provide when unnecessary. So I would say the protections we already have are sufficient, and certainly there's no, like what some people said, there's no evidence of massive fictitious absentee ballots out there. So I would just say what we already have is sufficient. I trust my town clerk, I trust my supervisor, the checklist, and I trust those in other communities, including Rochester. So that's my answer.
Follow up, Madam Chair. Can I follow up, Madam Chair?
I'm talking to myself, the host. I got reminded that I was muted to cough and didn't unmute. Representative Groen.
Yes, follow up, please.
Representative Groen, go ahead.
The Representative Horgan, I'm from Rochester, a city of a little over 30,000 people.
Yes.
And our clerk in Rochester is very capable, but I doubt if she knows 30,000 people by name or by voice to be able to recognize if someone applying for an absentee ballot is John Smith or is not John Smith. How is the safeguard there to assure that the person is, again, who he or she says she is?
I don't know. I mean, my town clerk and also, well, actually, our assistant town clerk, I mean, every community, 15,000 people, half the size comparable, and they're pretty with it. So I think they don't necessarily need to know everybody by name or site, and I don't know like why writing down this information is going to really help them that much. But they know what's normal and what's not. They know when they're being scammed and when they're not being scammed. So I just I think I trust them even in the larger communities. So even I would even trust the city clerk in Manchester. So that's.
Thank you, Representative Horgan. Representative Mooney, did you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Representative, for taking my question. I'm just wondering if you know if it's acceptable, for example, if a voter's ballot were to be nullified by an invalid absentee ballot. Are you familiar with that scenario, or do you know of any acceptability related to that?
I'm probably not the right person that is tracked. You do, if you do show up at the polling place after there's an absentee ballot in your name, and we've been modifying that somewhat in order to require more processing, you can cast the ballot in person. So that would probably something you might direct more at the Secretary of State. But that's something that can happen even if you have this bill. And certainly they do publish the names of people who applied for absentee ballots, and that's one of the reasons why they do it, in case there's either a clerical error or an attempted fraud. So that's a concern already. So that's I really I know the Attorney General's office, the Secretary of State's office do pursue voter fraud, and I've actually don't recall seeing that particular scenario playing out. But you should that question probably be better directed at them. And certainly I understand the concern, and certainly would be a good reason not to pass on this bill today if that was indeed what the chair or whoever, what the chair had in mind. But that's yeah, so that's already an issue. It's something that can happen. This bill isn't going to prevent it. It's just going to make things harder for the clerks and harder for the voters. So
thank you, Representative Horgan. Representative Prudhomme O'Brien.
Yeah. Representative Horgan, you mentioned that you have some trouble with remembering your Social Security number. But what about the other documents that Senator Gray brought up that could be used if you discuss with your town clerk? Do you find those impossible to access as well? Or just, you'd only need one of them.
I mean, I wouldn't be that big a deal for me, but I'm a relative. I mean, sometimes I'm a little spacey, but there's lots of people whose memories are worse than mine, or whose lives are more disorderly than mine. So I just, I mean, personally for me, I have my driver's license with me at all times. I actually, despite what I said, I am fairly confident that I do remember my Social Security number. But there's people who have a harder time with that with me, but they still have the right to vote. They're still capable of making a diligent decision. And also, frankly, much as I love my town clerk and she's very trustworthy, I don't necessarily want to have to tell her what my driver's license number is. Even though I'm sure she could look it up in the DMV database. I don't necessarily want to tell what last four digits of my social security number are in a context where it's not necessary. You know, I don't necessarily want to burden her with all that stuff or trust her with all that stuff. So that's, and all this does, which stops for individual voters, it would, you know, an organized attempted voter fraud could still be carried out without it, but it would I'm quite confident it would be caught, and it's a pretty serious felony if you do it anyways. I don't think anyone's going to falsify Mrs. Jones's absentee ballot just to cast a second vote. I think that's a fantasy. So once again, also those concerns should probably best be brought up with the Attorney General, the Secretary of State's office, who probably are listening in on this, and also this is also something you can bring up a subcommittee. So it's if you want, I think if you do want to move forward with this bill, I think it's a bad idea. You certainly don't want to pass it as it is today. You want to verify which.
Right. Thank you, Representative Horgan. Are there any further questions for Representative Horgan? I'm not seeing any, so thank you, Representative Horgan. Also asking to speak to this bill is Joan Dargy. Welcome, Ms. Dargy.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Hi. Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to bring up, so as part of the, as a co-chair of the New Hampshire City and Town Clerks Legislative Committee, we are not in support of this bill. I do have a suggestion that I'll bring up at the end, but the first thing, the few concerns is, number one, we have no access to verify anybody's social security number. We just don't have it. It's not in ElectionNet. It's not, there's no way. So anybody could write any four numbers down they want, and I don't know. So I don't know what that's going to prove for verification. Secondly, driver's license numbers changed in the last 2 years. So if you've been a voter for 10 or 15, 20 years, the driver's license number that is in ElectionNet is not the driver's license number that is on your license right now. So again, verifying a driver's license number would be difficult. So the way, and I do want to state that, you know, and we recently had record numbers, all of us, of absentee voting. And I have to say, in Milford, we've never had a fraudulent absentee voter to date. One of the things that prevents that is when somebody mails in an absentee ballot request, that request is mailed to the address on record. So in my mind, that is the way that we prevent fraud from those absentee ballot request forms that are mailed in or dropped off prior to having the ballots ready. And my suggestion would be, if we'd like to amend this bill, would be that we just add in that if you are going to request an absentee ballot in person and vote that day, get your ballot that day, that they just show us an ID. There is no requirement right now to show an ID when you pick up an absentee ballot in person. And I think that would address Senator Gray and Senator Gaida's issues with that, because any absentee ballots then that we are mailing out are going to the mailing address on record, and any absentee ballots requested in person, the person would be required to show you ID. And I'll tell you, nobody would have a problem with that, because everybody that shows up in town hall to request an absentee ballot, when we have them, they always want to show me an ID because they're just so used to doing it at voting. The other thing that my concern about having the last four of somebody's social security number and their driver's license number on those absentee ballot request forms is that so many times people come into town hall and they'll fill out an absentee ballot request form and they just leave it anywhere. So then their private info is out there for somebody else to pick up and find, or they're mailed to the wrong address. Somebody else in town hall opens it. Again, that's private information. And I just think that by requiring that a voter show an ID when doing it in person would help relieve those issues. And again, I thank you for listening to our views.
Thank you very much for coming and joining us on this bill also this morning. Does anybody on the committee have any questions for Ms. Dargy? I'm not seeing any, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Also, I saw a hand raised to speak on this was Betsy McCain. Betsy McCain, did you still want to speak? Your hand disappeared. Ms. McCain, if you're with us, if you unmute, I think you will join us.
Yes, hi. Hi, good morning. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and welcome. Thanks to you all for your time spent on these important issues. Again, I wanted to thank my colleague, Joan, for speaking before me. We heard some comments about folks looking out for the interests of voters, which obviously is where your emphasis should be. But I wanted to selfishly stand up for the interests of the town clerk, who, when I read the proposed legislation, I was quite taken aback for how much discretion now is being put on the shoulders of the town clerk. Because in fact it says, give us one of these two things, and if not, talk to your town clerk. And I'm just concerned that a BJ's card, if somebody writes down their BJ's number for me, might be okay, but a BJ's number for Joan wouldn't be. And so I just think there's a little bit too much uncertainty about, well, what are we trying to prove? And then Senator Gray indicated that we have access to a wealth of information, and absolutely that is true, but we are also sworn to use that information only for the purposes for which we've been granted that access. So we can't go diving into the motor vehicle database and check out a plate number, or we can't go diving into the vital records database just to see who married somebody because we're curious. So I'm a little bit concerned about how we practically would confirm this information. And then I did take to heart the question that one of your panel raised about, do we think there's a need to identify somebody who is requesting an absentee ballot? And I think the application, again, is signed under penalty of perjury. We do confirm that they are a registered voter. And as Joan said, we do confirm the address, that it's being mailed to an address that we have on record. Or if they've asked us to mail it to their home in Florida, they have to list their Hanover domicile. And so we have that as well. And then if this is truly designed to catch the worst of the worst, as we heard when the bill was introduced, again, I think this is adding another level of complexity and frustrating exchange between the clerk and the voter. That again, we end up having to sort of try to do our best to navigate. And I'm just not sure that we're creating that friction for any problem that's been illustrated as worthy of a solution. So thank you for taking my comments, and I would urge the committee to not support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us this morning and speaking. Is there anybody in the committee who would have a question for Ms. McCain? Anybody on the committee have a question, raise their hand. I'm not seeing anybody. Thank you very much, Ms. Representative Prudhomme O'Brien has a question.
A quick question. Thank you. I was wondering where you're from and what town you represent.
Oh, sure. I'm from the town of Hanover, and we have about 10,000 people on our voter checklist. And so most of our absentee ballot requests, especially through the pandemic, in fact, were coming through via email. And so again, and I would heartily agree with Ms. Daigle that when people appear before us, they fully expect to show us a photo ID. Again, I'm not sure, other than the checks we have in place with the addressing and the knowing that they're a registered voter and that the voter signing under penalty of perjury, again, how we would confirm remotely a BJ's card. so thanks.
Any other questions for Ms. McLean? I'm not seeing any. Thank you very much for joining us. Is there anybody else here in attendance who would like to speak to the bill that we're having a public hearing on? It is Senate Bill 54 relative to the ballot application form. I'm not seeing anybody, so Senator Gray.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I just wanted to respond to Representative Mooney's question about absentee ballots and voting in person. Right now that the state law does not allow you to start processing absentee ballots until at least 2 hours after the polls open. Those ballots, both the absentee and the regular ballots, are processed through the same checklist. And there's 2 conditions where you would not be able to vote in person had an absentee ballot been processed. And those things about processing them is if you've opened the inner envelope or you've marked the red AV on the checklist at the time. Okay, and those 2 things would preclude the voter who might want to come in and not have his absentee ballot counted from actually going through and voting in person. So if that answers your question, I hope that you're good. And I'll keep my BJ's card in my pocket because you guys wouldn't be able to verify that anyway. So
there you go. Any other questions for Senator Gray or Senator Gaida, I believe is still with us? He is. And a last call for comments from the public. Representative Prudhomme O'Brien.
Thank you. I have a question for Senator Gray. When you were writing this bill or discussing this bill in the writing process, did it come up that the town clerks would not be able to verify some of this information? So that makes me wonder, is it requested because in the future, should there be an investigation, it may be good to have this information to verify things?
Let me answer this way. That section near the end of the bill, and I don't have the bill, well, I guess I do have it up on my screen. We specifically in there allow the clerks to go in and look at the DMV or contact their local or state police to get the information about the driver's license number. Okay. But not everyone has a New Hampshire driver's license, as been pointed out by our representative from Durham. And not everyone has a voter, or I should say a non-driver ID. So what other things are out there? Last 4 digits of the Social Security number is something right now that I don't know how a town clerk would verify that. Unless that information was provided at the time that they registered. But once provided, it would be entered into ElectionNet. And should someone try to do that again with a different set of 4 digits, then we certainly would be able to start asking questions that those 2 numbers, because as far as I know, my Social Security number has never changed, okay? But remember that other section, hey, there are so many things that that the clerks do have access to. And this bill, maybe it needs to be strengthened in that section, but this bill provides the authorization for the clerk to go in and verify who married myself and my wife, if I chose to use that as the information. Who was my best man? Who was the maid of honor? All those things are on the marriage certificate that is on file in the state system. I mean, there is so many things out there that could be done. Now, this is also will be trained by the Secretary of State. And I imagine that one of the things that they will train is that failing all else, they can sign an affidavit. I would be a little suspicious that that would be the only thing that they could do. But again, that's not my suspicions that that are going to rule in this place. But I think that there are, yes, the last 4 digits of the Social Security number are something that we do have as an option to provide on the registration card. It is not mandatory. So that's the best answer I can give you, Representative.
Representative Lane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Gray, personally, I'll get this to a question, but I have grave issues with requiring people to divulge any of their Social Security number. It is not an identification number. It is used by the federal government and creditors to identify you for income and to make sure that you get the correct benefits under the Social Security Act. Why are we using it for voter identification? It's not the intent of a Social Security number. Why did you choose that?
We are providing the opportunity to use something. Okay. Now I'm assuming that that you either own or rent a home here in New Hampshire. Okay. If you rent the home and you can provide the name of the person who owns that residence, that is something that the clerk can verify. They have the property tax records. If you own a home, then certainly you have a tax bill or other information. So if it were the only piece of information that you could provide, I'd say, yeah, we probably are going too far. But, we're not. We have it open so that you can provide a plethora of information and just choose one of them. Just choose one.
May I have a follow-up, please?
Follow-up.
Thank you. Senator, I guess in the drafting of this, what if the town clerk, every town clerk does things differently. What if my town clerk only wants the Social Security number or my driver's ID that doesn't have the correct number on it because when I registered before, it's changed?
And you or I or anyone else that finds that out should report that to the Secretary of State so that that town clerk can be re-educated.
Correct, but I want to get an absentee ballot because I'm just saying we're putting a lot on the voter. We're putting obstacles in front of the voter, and I will desist at that point. Thank you.
Representative Muirhead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to just clarify, if I may, Senator, is this bill asking for information as proof of identity that we know town clerks do not possess, such as the last 4 digits of a Social Security number?
They would not normally have the last 4 digits of the Social Security number that I know of unless it was provided as voluntary information on the application. But it was a piece of information that most people have access to. My grandsons, by the time they were 6, their father had to file the taxes, and they already had a Social Security number at the tender age of 6 months. Again, is this thing perfect? No, it's not. Does it, we're making a lot about this. The Constitution provides a lot of things. Constitution provides that, just as a comparison, the right to bear arms. All right. And what do I have to do if I want to exercise my right to bear arms? I have to go through background checks. I have to provide information. I have to. Well, now we look at the Constitution and it says you've got the right to vote. Well, when that Constitution was written, wasn't it that it was only landowners that were males that, could have the right to vote? things have changed over time. And again, I think that there is an interest in the state to make sure that our elections are conducted in a manner such that every citizen of the United States has the right to vote unless they're convicted of a felony and currently serving a sentence. But the question is where do they have the right to vote? And RSA 654 in New Hampshire says that once they've established their domicile and they've picked New Hampshire as that place more than any other where they want to interact socially and civilly and participate in self-government, that once they've established that domicile, they have the right to vote in New Hampshire. Okay? What does that mean, establish the
Thank you.
domicile?
Thank you, Senator Gray.
I'll be quiet.
Representative Prudhomme O'Brien.
Thank you, ma'am. My question, I'm not sure if this is correct to ask Senator Gray, but he may know, or Senator Gaida may, or later we may hear from Deputy Scanlon. But when it comes to, it just came up, so I want to ask, and I want to talk about it. We talked about, there was a concern about driver's licenses and number changes of driver's licenses. And I'm looking at my own driver's license and I'm seeing a pattern. So wouldn't that be able to be established by anyone who's trying to find out the driver's license number and notice the change? I recall a number, just a few years ago, I had a conversation with a police officer and he was telling me about driver's license numbers and telling me about how he would know by asking me just a few questions. He could tell me what my driver's license number was just by asking a few questions, and he did. So you would know it by my birthday, my last name, my, there's my dog, excuse me. But it's you can figure it out. Is my point. Isn't that correct?
Because the driver's license number used to be, and mine used to be the first letter, last letter of my last name, first letter of my first name, and then a series of numbers that talked about my date of birth, and then a sequential number depending on who else might have that. That was all changed. And one of the reasons why you see in this bill is allowing the clerks to go in and look at the records or ask for assistance is because their record, even if that was given at the time of registration, may not match what the driver's license number is now, which is more sequential, random, depending on when you got the number, etc. So it does not match that pattern anymore.
Representative Bergeron.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Senator, did it come up in the Senate hearings? Did anybody mention that not all city clerks have access to motor vehicle records because some city clerks don't register cars? It's the tax collector that does it.
If you look at the last page here, it says that they can contact either the local police or the state to get that information.
Okay. Further question?
Representative, go ahead.
Also, you mentioned the possibility of looking up marriage records as an example of other means of identifying, confirming someone's identity. Are you aware that every time a clerk accesses the Bureau of Vital Records database to search a record, the clerks are charged a fee for doing so?
That may be a good thing to add to this bill, is that the fee is waived for the state. If that's the case, I was not aware of that, so that may be a good catch, Representative Bergeron.
Yeah. And one final question. If a city or town is getting 9,000 absentee ballots for a presidential election, this is adding a terrific burden on the clerks to be verifying 9,000 applications before those ballots are either sent out or sent to the polls on election day.
I will check with the city clerk, but here in Rochester, we did receive, multiple requests. But again, I believe that a very high percentage of that were people who actually came in and voted in person. We actually, in the community center, set up a satellite office for the town or for the city clerk to be able to process those people who came in wanting to do that. So that certainly reduced the burden on the town clerks for looking up any of this information and trying to process them by mail.
Okay, thank you, Senator.
Are there any further questions from panelists for Senator Gray? I'm not seeing any. Thank you, Senator Gray, for jumping back into the discussion here. Is there anybody else in attendance who wants to speak to the bill currently being considered? And that is SB 54, relative to the application for absentee ballots. I'm not seeing any, so I am going to close the public hearing on SB 54. All right. So that is the end of this committee's noticed business this morning. I want to thank everybody for attendance. I want to thank Representative Groen and Representative Hayward for making sure our room is still as it should be at LOB. I hope this worked out for everybody. I will not be scheduling anything, obviously, for next week. We have enough to do with session at the end of next week. And then hopefully we will have a handle on the final amount of Senate bills coming over to get those scheduled in April. Does anybody have anything else they want to bring up for the committee this morning or this afternoon now? All right, I'm not seeing anything. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending and participating. Representative Ward, I hope